Why do the evil people in this world, the liars, cheaters, and swindlers, so often succeed? I came to the conclusion that the real reason lies in other people. Most of us living on this planet are basically honest, mostly decent. We tend to tell the truth in most situations and treat each other with some kindness. It's no surprise that we also take it for granted that those around us will behave the same way. But our assumption that most people are honest most of the time leaves us terribly vulnerable to those bastards who lie and cheat without a twinge of conscience. They can deceive us for quite a long time, sometimes forever, and we don't even notice it. Because we don't lie or cheat, we don't suspect quickly enough that others might be doing this to us. It was Gina Giannopoulos taught me this painful lesson. Or maybe I should say Gina Giannopoulos McMillan, because that's her married name. I'm Alex McMillan, her ex-husband. One morning, the engine of my Lexus started making terrible noises, and I left the car at Marshall Motors, where Dominic had been working on my cars for about 10 years. He called me around lunchtime, but instead of saying that the car was fine, he said, "You better come here and talk to me." When I arrived, he led me to a private office at the back of the building. "Alex, the engine is fine, the belt is just loose." But there was something else. He looked at me seriously. Someone ruined the brake line. There was enough hydraulic fluid left for a normal stop, but if you had to go down a steep hill or stop in a hurry, you would crash the car. I stared at him with my mouth open. 6 months earlier, Gina and I had moved into a new, chic, modern house in the suburbs. It was magnificent, with cathedral ceilings and lots of glass, and was surrounded by a tranquil forest. But it was also at the end of a cul-de-sac on a main street that sloped steeply down a hill. If I had driven home that evening, I would almost certainly have been killed. After a couple of minutes, I collected my thoughts a little. "Dominic, do me a favor, okay? Don't tell anyone about this yet. Have you fixed everything yet?" "No, old man, a crime was committed here. Or at least an attempt. I have to call the police." "Fine." I thought a little more. "How about we do this? Take some photos of the brake line and write it down as if it were for the police. But let's not call them yet. Just leave the car parked in the back lot and I'll borrow one of those jalopies you keep for a few days. There are surveillance cameras on the property, right?" "Yes." Dominic looked doubtful. "That's the problem. Whoever did this will want to hide everything when he finds out that I'm not dead. So I'm betting they'll try to steal a car from the lot in the next few nights. I don't want to call the police until this happens. Then we will have a recording from the camera which we will give to them." 45 minutes later, I stepped out of my rented blue Corolla and parked it in the driveway. I took the whole day off. I wanted to think carefully about what was happening. The attempt on my life had to be connected with money. I was the president and co-founder of Apex, a $6.8 billion Silicon Valley software company, and my first instinct was that someone wanted to get me out of the way as part of an attack on the company. It was a day off for Carmelita, our cook housekeeper, who usually worked from noon to 8 in the evening, and the house was quiet. Gina must have gone shopping or playing tennis. I walked aimlessly around the house, turning over possible culprits and possible reasons for what was happening in my mind. I picked up the phone and spoke with Jeff Denham, an old friend of mine who runs a security firm that Apex uses. Without explaining the reasons to him, I made it clear that I suspected some kind of problem, either some financial irregularities that were already occurring, or a future attack on the company. We agreed that his financial specialists would conduct a full audit of our computers and financial records. I gave Jeff a temporary password that would allow his people to access everything they needed from the desktop in my office, and told him I wanted to do it discreetly. "We'll tell everyone they're doing a routine check." I then called Meredith, my longtime secretary, and told her to enter a temporary password into my computer and that Jeff's guys would be over later in the day. Having finished this, I resumed my aimless wanderings. I walked over to our home computer and poked around, not expecting to find anything. Out of pure idle curiosity, I tried to open some of Gina's files, including her email, and, to my surprise, they were all password protected. What could Gina have on our computer that she wouldn't want me to see? Short of something unlikely like planning a surprise party, I couldn't imagine it. I made a mental note to ask her about it later. I was drinking tea in the kitchen at about 4:30 p.m. when Gina came in. She looked at me and practically fell. I had never seen anything like it. Her mouth opened, she turned white, and her body pressed against the doorframe. "Alex, you, what are you doing here?" I smiled softly. "Actually, honey, I live here. Do you remember?" She pulled herself together a little and sat down at the table opposite me. Forcing a smile, she said, "Of course, a baby. It's just, well, you're almost never home this early and I didn't see your car outside. Everything happened in an instant. I was about to tell her all about the brakey line, but instead, I just said, there was a problem with the engine and I had to leave it with Dominic for a few days. He rented me one of their jalopies, the one in the driveway. Why didn't I tell her the truth? At the time, I think I thought it was because I didn't want to worry her. I didn't want to say, by the way, honey, someone's trying to kill me. Why scare your wife? But when I thought about it later, it turned out that the reason was completely different. Why was she so shocked to see me sitting in the kitchen? Not just surprised, but stunned, as if it was the most unexpected thing in the world. I didn't understand her reaction, and the more I thought about it later, the more it gnawed at me. "Oh," she said, and I saw how she was trying to pull herself together. "Well, it's great that you returned home so early. What do you want to do with dinner? Maybe we can go somewhere since Carmelita left?" "Great," she said. "Just let me take a shower, and maybe we can go to the Andante." Then she quickly walked out of the room, and after a couple of minutes I heard the shower running. I put my cup in the sink and headed to the bedroom, thinking I'd wash my face and change into something more casual before we headed out. The bedroom door was almost closed, and to my surprise, as I approached, I heard Gina talking on the phone in a low, urgent voice. Why did she have to turn on the shower and then call someone? I didn't hear the call, so she called herself. I didn't hear anything special, just, "No, Dowdle, I have no idea. No, of course not. Yes, we'll have to. Okay, baby. Bye." Not much, but more than enough to make me freeze in place. She was talking to Jeff Denham, my friend and security guru. His middle name was Dowd, and I've called him Dowdle since about 8th grade. Gina took the nickname from me. There was no doubt who was on the other end of the line. I waited until she hung up and headed to the bathroom. I then waited another 2 minutes before entering the bedroom and changing clothes. I washed my face in the guest bathroom so as not to disturb Gina's shower. My head was going through the motions. What the hell is going on? Could Gina and my friend Jeff have been involved in what happened to my car? Despite the evidence of the last 10 minutes, it seemed completely impossible. Gina and I had been married for 8 years. I was 46 and she was 37. I've already been married and divorced once. When I was 20, I had 2 wonderful children, whom I only saw during the summer holidays and visited occasionally because after the divorce, their mother moved them 2,000 miles away. I first met Gina when she was touring the Apex offices while working as a sales representative for a computer support firm we worked with. I tried to find out who she was and then arranged a lunch date with a friend from her group who could introduce us casually. It was worth the effort. Even if you woke her up from a sound sleep, Gina would be one of the 10 most beautiful women you have ever seen. And when she has time to put on clothes and makeup, she is simply stunning. He is almost 178 centimeters tall, long raven black hair and dark eyes, high cheekbones, and a toned, athletic body. She also has a look, a way of walking, moving, presenting herself, looking into the eyes that says, "I know I'm sexy, and I know you think so too." From the very first time I became interested in her, I realized that I would have a lot of competition, and it was a pleasant surprise that we were soon dating, and then dating seriously, and about a year later, we were engaged to get married. I'm good-looking but not handsome, and I'm 9 years older than Gina. I knew that my success in business and my money had to be part of the attraction for her, and that didn't bother me. Why be successful if it doesn't help you get your foot in the door with gorgeous women? Plus, we had an ironclad prenup that limited her to no more than $1 million if we divorced in less than 20 years. So I was sure she loved me as much as she loved my money. We will live very well together, and if she likes being rich with me, that's great. As long as she makes me happy, too. Gina made me very happy. She spent a lot of money, but I had it, so it wasn't a problem. She was energetic and lively, very outgoing and full of fun. She made a lot of friends, took me to a lot of parties, and flirted with a lot of guys. But at the end of the evening, she came home with me and usually didn't leave me alone. Gina was experienced and enthusiastic, as adventurous in bed as she was anywhere else. She loved hang gliding, rock climbing, and the like. She exhausted me, and I was completely happy about it. But the events of the last few hours have changed everything, or at least threatened to change everything. I had to think twice about it, primarily because Dowdle seemed to be involved. Under other circumstances, he would have been the first person I called. In fact, I already called him and asked his people to start reviewing Apex's finances. I now realized that perhaps I had made the wrong move. In warning him that I was suspicious, thank God I didn't mention the car was fake. Neither he nor Gina knew that I knew about it, at least not yet. That evening, I tested my acting skills to the limit. Gina and I went to the Andante and had a nice dinner and a bottle of good Chianti. I was incredibly anxious, but tried my best not to appear withdrawn or distant. I tried to keep the conversation going as usual. I knew that the evening would end with sports exercises in bed, such as Gina's habit, after a pleasant dinner with good wine. And I wondered what to do. But the right decision, obviously, was to go with the flow. Not only because I didn't want to arouse any suspicion in her, but also because sex with my wife was the most enjoyable thing I've ever had. Suspicion or not, I was going to enjoy her at least one more time. We didn't do anything unusual for us. When she came out of the bathroom in a short red nightie, I was waiting for her in bed, and then we made love. And today we did the same. It was amazing. And then we hugged for a few minutes, said, "Wow," and "I love you," and went to bed. An exciting but typical romp in bed after a pleasant but typical dinner. Nothing unusual, or so it seemed. One of my talents is the ability to think about a problem in part of my mind while I am doing other things. For example, having dinner with my wife or making love to her. So when I got up the next morning, I knew exactly what I would do to get to the bottom of the mysterious attempt on my life and the obvious involvement of my wife. I woke up early and got busy preparing for a quick trip to Los Angeles. I packed an overnight bag, asked the company travel agent to book me the usual 3-day round-trip flight and a room at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, where I always stayed in Los Angeles. I called a limousine to the airport, ate a quick breakfast, then went into the bedroom and woke Gina. "Baby, sorry for bothering you." I smiled at her and enjoyed the sight of her beautiful face as her eyes slowly opened and she smiled back at me. "Good morning, Alex," she murmured, pulling me towards her for a long kiss, then another. God, how good she was. I was more than a little tempted to take off my clothes and jump back into bed with her, but I resisted. "I need to go to Los Angeles, honey," I said. "I received a few emails this morning about a meeting we were trying to organize. It all came together unexpectedly, and I need to be there for a couple of days." It was a lie, but a very plausible one. I traveled often, and business trips often arose on demand. "Okay, darling, I'll warm your bed. Will you come back on Friday?" "Yes, that's what we're planning. Just make sure that only you warm the bed. Okay, Gina?" She laughed hard and then hugged me tightly. "There's no one here but me, baby." "Just imagine how excited I'll be by Friday," she whispered in my ear. In the limousine, I marveled at my wife's ability to lie to me. Either I was completely wrong and she had nothing to do with the attempt on my life, or she was one hell of a skilled actress. Moreover, he is a cold-blooded monster. I hoped I was wrong, but I didn't see how that could be. On the short flight from San Jose to Los Angeles, I worked out some of the details of my plan. Complete secrecy was key, since Jeff Denem, apparently, was involved. I had to avoid any actions that might lead him to suspect me, and since he was the top security guy in the entire Bay Area, that meant bringing in someone from afar. On my taxi ride from the airport, I stopped at an electronics store and paid cash for a discarded cell phone. Then, after checking into the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, I called Dan Camarina and arranged to meet him for lunch, not far from his downtown office. Dan was my right-hand man when I started Apex, and we both got pretty rich when it took off. 3 years earlier, we parted on amicable terms. He moved his family to Los Angeles and took a job at a financial services company that, thanks to his brains, was doing well. Dan and I saw each other a couple of times a year, so no one thought it was strange that I came to visit him. We sat over sandwiches and beer on the restaurant's outdoor terrace, reminiscing about old times and sharing stories of recent challenges and triumphs. He asked about Gina, told me about his wife Linda and what their children were doing. But when we finished eating, I leaned forward and spoke more seriously. "I'd like to ask you a couple of favors, Dan, if you don't mind." He looked interested, and I continued. "I have reason to believe that I may have some kind of problem inside Apex." "Do you have a security company that you trust?" "Absolutely," he said. "Vertex Securities, Alan Newman, the guy who runs it, is first class. But you still have Jeff Denham, don't you?" "Yes, but I need someone from the outside. Here's my first request. Could you call Newman and tell him that a good friend would like to talk to him on the phone and get advice, but without saying my name?" Without hesitation, Dan called his cell phone and made an appointment with his friend over the phone later that day. "Thank you, Dan. I will ask you to please forget that this ever happened. Now here's another request of mine. Actually, this is a question I want to ask you. In the time you've known Gina, have you ever seen her act in any way inappropriate or suspicious at all?" To my surprise, Dan looked away and his face turned red. I waited, and finally he looked at me again, a more guilty expression on his face than I had ever seen before. Glasses and a San Francisco Giants baseball cap, and left the hotel through a side entrance, then caught a taxi to the Hertz office in LAX. By 9:45, I was in San Diego and parked in the lot next to Asimov's office. Barry Asimov was a short, fat man in his 40s. He had a bad hairbrush and his brown suit didn't fit him very well. In short, he was a completely expressionless figure. But within 10 minutes, I realized that he was one of the smartest people I have met in a long time. I knew I had to trust someone, and I decided it would be Asimov. I got straight to the point. "Mr. Asimov, I need a security company that could do important work for me. It is outside this area, will require a lot of high-tech computer work, and is extremely confidential. I'm willing to pay very well for what I need, in addition to covering all your people's expenses. The work could take the next few weeks, and I wouldn't be surprised if your fee was in the 7 figures. For several moments, he looked at me intently. "Why did you decide to contact us, and why do you think we are suitable for this job?" "Someone recommended me to Alan Newman, and Newman spoke highly of you." "Why not just use Newman?" "He's very good." "Because I'm trying to cover my tracks. When we get into this, you'll understand why I have good reason to be wary. Newman called you on my behalf, but he never knew my name, so it would be quite difficult for anyone to trace me to you. Not impossible, but difficult." We talked a little more about preliminary preparation, and then Asimov said, "Let you tell your story. If it looks like something we can handle, then we're in business." I told him everything. Who I was, what Apex was doing, and what it was worth, and also about the recent attempt on my life. I told him I suspected Gina and Denham were involved, and why. And I repeated Dan Cameron's story about Gina's behavior and her possible affair with Josh Daniels, although I never mentioned Cameron's name. When I finished, Asimov asked me some probing questions. He clearly knew his stuff. Then he leaned back in his chair. "I know Jeff Dunham, at least by reputation. He is considered to be very smart. Many in Silicon Valley swear by his work. So if he's really doing something shady, we'll have to be very sensitive in how we go after him." We talked a little more. And finally, Asimov said, "That's what I recommend. Essentially, you need 2 things. Someone needs to look very carefully at your books, internal documents, and memos. And someone else needs to check Denham, your wife, and other high-ranking people at Apex. David Carlos, my best computer scientist, I will entrust him with the first task. 2 or 3 financiers work for him. They will be able to analyze what they find. And I will ask Vera Anderson to assemble an observation group for the second part. For 30 minutes, the 4 of us sat in the conference room, eating takeout sandwiches and discussing my situation. Asimov, for the most part, did not interfere, allowing Carlos and Anderson to ask questions. But every now and then, he would put in his 2 cents, and I never ceased to be amazed at his intelligence. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in good hands. By mid-afternoon, I was on my way back to Los Angeles. To my relief, Asimov understood why I could not immediately give him a large fee, and was ready to trust me on the basis of a bill prepared by a notary in his office. All your digging in Apex Carlos was going to be conducted through my computer, which was connected to other important computers of the company. His method was simple. He made me remember the URL of Asimov's website. Whenever I was alone in my office for 2 hours or more, I would go to this address, download and install software from this site on my computer. This software allowed Carlos and his team download and copy any files they wanted to look at from my computer and those it was connected to. Whenever I needed to leave the office, I closed the connection, logged out of the site, deleted the program from the computer and covered my tracks in the usual way, deleting the browser history and so on. It wasn't a completely traceless method, but only an expert who already suspected and thoroughly examined my computer would have been able to see what was going on. He calculated that in 20 hours of searching the internet, he could find and download everything he needed to understand if something was wrong in Apex. Part of Anderson's job included routine supervision of Gina and key staff members, Arek. We agreed not to put Denham under surveillance, since he, as a security officer, would likely notice the attention, no matter how good Asimov's men were. But she tasked people with digging through phone conversations and credit card records, making sure it was done at a safe distance so Denham didn't know about it. I emphasized to them that Denham was no fool. Spying on him or trying to bug his phone, his home, or office would be a very bad idea. I'm willing to bet he'll contact us within a day or so. I see, Vera answered. But I would like to install audio and video recording in your house, as well as a bug in Gina's purse and wiretapping of her mobile phone. We agreed that I would let them know when the house was empty. She promised that her team could get the job done in no more than 3 hours. The first thing they'll do is comb the house to make sure Denham hasn't already installed surveillance equipment. As for Gina's purse and phone, I gave them the address of her tennis club. Vera assured me that it would not be difficult to pick the lock of her locker, quickly check her bag and phone for bugs, and plant her own bugs. My part of the deal was simple. Go home and pretend everything was fine. Continue to live your normal life at work and at home, but at the same time, be alert. Asimov was sure that whoever tried to kill me would wait a little before making another attempt. At the very least, they will have to make sure that your Lexus is destroyed so that there is no evidence of the first attempt. And within a few days, we should have enough data to understand what's going on. So don't do anything stupid, Alex. No hiking through forests or unfamiliar places. You can even make an effort to avoid driving alone. Make an excuse for Gina to drive you to work and stuff like that. But I don't think you'll have anything to worry about right away. I smiled ironically at him. Easy for you to say, Barry, but I'll be as careful as I can. Before I left them, we developed a communication system. It had to be one-sided, from me to Asimov. I continued to use discarded mobile phones. When I was free to call, I would dial the number and ask for Larry Asimov. The receptionist was tasked with correcting my mistake and then connecting my call directly to Barry. We agreed that I would try to call at least once every 2 days. Back at the Beverly Wilshire, I had dinner and then called Ginato to tell her I'll be home a day early. She was animated on the phone, teasing me about how lonely and cold she was in our big bed, and I promised to keep her warm on Thursday night. When I hung up, I realized how crazy it seemed that my wife was plotting to kill me. Before all this started, I would say that I had no illusions about Gina. She was beautiful and sexy, adventurous and energetic, but she was also narcissistic and a little cold. She wasn't a heartbreaker who took in stray cats. Her number one interest was Gina, and you didn't have to know her long to realize that fact. And yet, I would say that she loved me, in her own way. She was not a warm, caring wife, but I was not a particularly affectionate husband. We didn't often snuggle by the fireplace or take leisurely walks along beautiful beaches, except for the occasional Caribbean vacation when we made love during the day and went out to dinner and the casino in the evening. We were both ambitious, goal-oriented people, and although Gina no longer worked, she energetically pursued the things that interested her: tennis, shopping, hanging out with friends, and sex with me. I would say that in her own way, Gina loved me. In fact, I would say that Gina loved me as much as she could love anyone, given her basic nature. And given my own nature, this was enough for me. I liked our life together. I was happy. But, needless to say, now all these assumptions have been called into question. Although I was shocked by the idea that she might be trying to kill me, the preliminary evidence definitely pointed to it. It wasn't hard to come up with a motive. It's money, stupid. And if what Dan Camoran told me was true, she could be connected to at least two of my assistants, Josh Daniels of Apex and my friend Jeff Denham. In other words, if all my worst suspicions were true, she was a monster. A cold-blooded, heartless, evil bitch. If she really slept with Daniels, tried to seduce Dan Camoran, and was somehow involved with Denham, this suggested that she was the driving force behind everything that was happening. I spent most of the plane ride back to San Jose thinking about how this might all end. I was confident that I could be a good enough actor to fool Gina for a while. If she was really cheating on me, it would be a challenge to see if I could do it just as well. And if by some miracle my suspicions were proven wrong, I would be more than happy to open my heart to her love again. But if she really was behind the attempt on my life, let's just say I already had some ideas about how I wanted this story to end, and part of me was looking forward to it. My reunion with Gina on Thursday night was wonderful in several ways. First of all, the sex was amazing. This was almost always the case when we were apart. Whether it's love for me or pure excitement on Gina's part, I don't know. But either way, I have no complaints. She ordered Chinese food because she knows I love her, but she also greeted me wearing a short robe with nothing underneath, as I quickly discovered, and I decided it would be better to spend time in the bedroom before we ate. We had sex that left us both out of breath, and then we showered together and went downstairs to have dinner. The second reason why Thursday pleased me is that there was nothing special about it. As you can imagine, I watched Gina very carefully for any sign of guilt, anxiety, or vigilance. And there was none. She was herself with the usual stories about how she beat Sharon Combs 6-4 in the third set, how she found exactly the shoes she wanted, but, unfortunately, the wrong color, and so on. I was sure that she had no idea about my suspicions. When I arrived at the office on Friday, Jeff Denham had already called and said he was coming to see us. No surprise. Presumably, he wanted to report on the audit I asked for. Moreover, I was sure that he would want to find out why I asked for it. He would want to make sure that I did not have any suspicions about what he was up to. Jeff walked in with a smile on his face, shook my hand and said, "Hey man, how do you like Los Angeles?" I immediately wondered how he knew about my impromptu trip. Maybe he was talking to Gina, but I wasn't going to make him wary by asking about it. And anyway, he could have called the office and found out about it from Meredith. "Hi, Dowdle," I replied with a proper smile. Everything was fine in Los Angeles. Dan Camoran thought he had a tip for me on a new account, but I'm not sure it will work out. Still, it was nice to see him. "Are you here to tell me what your guys found out?" He sat down on a chair opposite my desk. Yes, it was a routine. They did find a couple of accounting errors, just a small thing. I passed them on to Pogreben downstairs, but there were no signs of anything suspicious, no leaks of funds or new recipients or any evidence of outside interference. What made you ask me to do an audit, Alex? I was watching Denham, and he seemed to be trying to make his question sound as casual as possible. It's good that I foresaw this and was prepared for the lie. I was almost sure it was nothing, but on Monday, I heard from Bert Williamson from 2K2. One of his vice presidents was at a meeting in New York, and one guy said he heard that one of the software firms in Silicon Valley had been attacked. Everything was very vague, something about fake subsidiaries that the money was transferred to. It sounded crazy, but it's been a while since I asked you to clean out our accounts, so I thought, what the hell? Sorry to put your guys through this, but it's always better to know. He chuckled, and I thought I saw him relax a little. No problem, man. That's why you keep us on prepayment. We chatted for a few more minutes about nothing, and as soon as he left, I logged in to the URL Carlisa, downloaded and installed his software, and let his guys begin auditing Apex's finances and communications. I wanted to give them as much time as possible, so I asked Meredith to order lunch, telling her that I would be eating at my desk today. She also brought me the San Jose Mercury News, which I hadn't had time to read that morning, and as I was eating my lunch, I was thrown off balance by an article on the Metro page. A fire in a car service center destroyed 12 cars. I read the article carefully. A fire broke out in the back parking lot of Marshall Motors. Police did not yet know what caused the fire, but it completely destroyed a dozen cars and damaged 6 or 8 more. I wasn't that shocked. I figured someone would steal my Lexus, but burning it down worked just as well, maybe even better, because it hid which car was the target. I called Dominic, reminding myself to be very careful with what I said. Barry and I both believed that Dowdle must have bugged my office. Hey, Dominic, I just saw an article in the Mercury News. First of all, is everything okay? Yes, Alex, thank you. It was already 10 p.m. and no one was there. But if you're calling to inquire about your Lexus, I'm afraid I have bad news. This is a complete loss. It's okay, Dominic. That's what insurance is for. Is it okay if I stop by for a few minutes after work today? We agreed that he would stay there until I could arrive at 6 in the evening, and we talked on the phone. I doubted that the surveillance tapes at Marshall Motors would capture anything suspicious, but I intended to ask Asimov's people to check them to make sure. Thank goodness Dominic wrote a report on the brake line and took some photos. Whoever set my car on fire knew his stuff. Dominic showed me around the area as the police and arson crew packed up and left. They think it's suspicious, he said, but they doubt they can prove it. Looks like that old Ford truck parked next to your Lexus. He pointed to a twisted, blackened piece of metal, leaked gasoline, and somehow a spark ignited it. The explosion set all the other cars on fire, he continued, vaguely waving his hand towards the destruction. We were standing in a parking lot, hardly near a bug, so I quietly asked him, "Is there any CCTV footage from last night?" "Yes, from 2 different cameras, and the police took them. But I thought you might want to see them, so I made a copy for you. I have them in my office in the drawer where we keep coffee filters. God bless you, Dom. And now, I want to ask you for one more favor, a big one." I asked Dominic to wait until Monday and then send the surveillance footage and his initial report of the car with photos to Barry Asimov's office. I told him the address and made him remember it by repeating it several times. I also left my rented jalopy at Dominic's, deciding that I would use a taxi for a few days. If I took them in different places, acting spontaneously, it was very unlikely that any of them would turn out to be a trap. Approaching the nearest taxi stand, I quickly called Larry, and within 2 minutes, I was in touch with Barry Asimov. Nothing special happened. Carlos received a lot of material from my computer, but it will take a few more hours for it to finish downloading. I promised to try to get to the office over the weekend. Vera Anderson's team combed my house looking for bugs, found none, and installed their own. They also cracked Gina's computer password and copied her files, although they hadn't read them yet, and were ready to grab her purse genie the next time she played tennis. I told him about the fire at Marshall Motors, and that he would have the records and report within a few days. We agreed that I would call back early next week. The next 2 days were so normal that it was almost strange. Gina and I did all our usual weekend things. On Saturday, we slept in, made love in the morning, then Gina cooked bacon and eggs. Breakfast was the only thing she liked to cook, so we usually ate out or had Carmelita cook for us. We pottered around the table, feeding each other and giggling. It was also a good way to make sure she didn't poison the food. After lunch, we headed to our clubhouse where I played golf with my usual foursome, and Gina hung out with her girlfriends at the pool. She was wearing a typically skimpy bikini, and with her sex bomb figure, she attracted more attention than all the other women, which suited Gina just fine. We stayed at the club for dinner on the terrace with our friends Sam and Ashley and then went home where we made love again. She was so damn beautiful, and I loved just looking at her while we made love. We both fell asleep after another 5 minutes. On Sunday, we went our separate ways. I said that I needed to spend part of the day in the office, which was not unusual. I asked her to give me a lift, and she went to the club for tennis. I used my discarded cell phone to tell Barry, and he promised that Vera would show her operative into the locker room while Gina played. I logged into the site, installed the program, and provided carless mind-your-own-business. This gave me a lot of time to think, in particular, why I didn't get angrier. After all, my wife and my best friend seemed to be plotting to kill me. And Gina obviously bullied me, at least with Josh Daniels, if not with others. So why wasn't I burning with rage? All I can come up with is, firstly, that I don't know for sure yet, and secondly, that revenge is a dish best served cold. Out of pure curiosity, I looked online, and it turns out that this phrase came from some guy I'd never heard of, Pierre-Ambroise François Choderlos de Laclos, back in the 18th century. Somehow, I managed to put my anger and feelings of betrayal into a small box in one corner of my mind. It wouldn't be difficult for me to get even, or spend even a minute feeling sorry for Gina or Dowdle. But so far, there was no evidence in front of my eyes, and I was not going to allow myself to go crazy. At about 5:30, Gina picked me up, fresh from playing tennis, swimming and showering. We bought some Indian food and had a quiet dinner at home. Neither of us wanted to make love, so we watched a couple of episodes of The Sopranos that we had recorded and hadn't seen yet, and then went to bed. Such an ordinary weekend as we have never had before. Nothing unusual happened on Monday either. I pretended to be working in my office, setting up software so David Carlos could finish my downloads. But when I called Barry on Tuesday afternoon, sitting in the back booth of a downtown bar, I found that his people had made significant progress. I want to tell you a few things, Alex, starting with your car. It was arson, just as we knew it would be. It was made by people who knew what they were doing. 2 guys dressed in black with ski masks, so we never recognized them. What about Dominic's photographs and documents? Will this be incriminated? I think it will convince the police that someone was trying to kill you, certainly, but it's hard to see how they can link it to Denham or your wife without further evidence. I thought for a moment. Okay, thank you. What else did you find out? David is done with your computer and his finance guys think they found something. They need another day or two to be sure. It appears that someone was withdrawing money over a period of about 8 months, starting just over a year ago, through some fictitious subsidiary company. Perhaps $2 million was stolen, no more. Then everything was quietly closed. David is confident he can trace this to a specific computer in your office if you give him a little more time. Is there a chance to get the money back? It's impossible to say for sure, but it's unlikely. Your best chance would be to find out who did it, take him to the police, and demand his money back. If the person who took the money has already spent it, then most likely it is gone forever. I didn't like the sound of that, but I knew that losing $2 million wouldn't break me or the company. It was a principle, and it made me very angry. Still, compared to murder, the loss of money was much less serious. Is there any news about Gina? Did Vera's people get bugs and get into her computer files? He cleared his throat. Everything looks bad, Alex. I won't lie to you. It looks like she was involved with two of the three guys in Arch whose names you gave us, Josh Daniels and Eddie Kreitler. And on Sunday, she called Enem from her cell phone, which makes it clear that she is sleeping with him. Lord, I said. I realized that I wasn't that shocked, but still, it felt like a blow to the head when my suspicions were confirmed so completely, and right away. Barry's voice distracted me from my dark thoughts. Look, give us a couple more days to put everything together. Vera's people are monitoring Gina's cell phone, the bug in her purse, and the bugs in your house. Plus, they're still working on her phony calls and credit cards. Turns out she had 2 cards in her maiden name and monthly bills were sent to her mailbox. Did you know anything about that? Hell no, I replied, still feeling a little dazed. Alex, I know this is very bad. Do you think you can hold on a little longer and remain calm while we get this all done? I know I have to, Barry, so I think I can. Do you think they will attack me again? There was a short pause, then he said, maybe. But they will be very careful because the news about your car is still so fresh. They won't want anyone to put 2 and 2 together. So if you take reasonable precautions, stay away from dark, lonely places and the like, you'll be fine. Do you want me to assign a couple of people to you? No. It's too likely that the guy's denim will detect it. No. I have to take care of myself. I'll call you on Thursday. I'm sorry, Alex, he said, his voice surprisingly soft. Yes, me too, I answered and hung up. Wednesday may have been the most sad day in my adult life. I knew my marriage was over. I knew that my best friend, the guy I'd known since junior high, the one I trusted more than anyone else, was having sex with my wife. And I knew that one or the other of them, or both, wants to kill me. This is what I was carrying around inside me, and I couldn't do anything about it until there was someone I could tell about it. So I wandered aimlessly around the office, pretending to work, chatting with Meredith every now and then while my mind wondered how I was going to avenge myself. The details, of course, depended on what Barry and his team could figure out, but the general outline of what I wanted to do was already clear in my mind. And as my anger began to rise, a sense of outrage and betrayal, a cold rage, I found myself greatly looking forward to what was to come. On Thursday, I waited until late in the evening to call Asimov, wanting to give his people as much time as possible. At 4 p.m., I went to my usual place to get my hair cut, and then, instead of going back to the office, I walked down the street to a diner, sat down at a table in the back with a cup of coffee and Khaled. Barry and I talked on the phone for almost an hour. I asked a lot of questions, made sure I understood everything he was telling me, and discussed various options with him. When we finally finished, he wished me luck and we said goodbye. I had what I needed, and I was going to move on. That evening, as well as the previous few, I earned an Oscar at home, treating Gina with the same tenderness and showing the same sexual desire as usual. I won't say I'm a better liar or actor than her, but I think I was just as good. We ate fried chicken dinner that Carmelita had cooked, watched a movie on TV, and made love before bed. It occurred to me that this would probably be the last time I had sex with Gina, maybe the last time I would ever touch her, but I didn't have the slightest desire to make it special. Now that I knew what she was like, the physical attraction I still felt for her was mixed with such hatred and disgust. After sex, we wished each other good night and fell asleep. The end of my marriage. Not a whimper, but an explosion. I left early Friday, not wanting to talk to Gina anymore, and grabbed a quick breakfast on the way to the office. I took Gina's car, a BMW convertible. I was almost sure that her car had not been damaged, and I wanted to get to work today alive. When she discovers that her car is gone, she will no doubt be annoyed, but by the time today is over, that will be the least of her worries. When Meredith arrived around 9 SAU, I called her into my office, said good morning, and handed her the list I had written out. "I'll have to change my schedule today," I said. "Please take care to prepare all this for me." She looked at my list, and I saw her eyes widen. She looked at me in surprise, clearly expecting an explanation, but when I remained silent, she simply nodded her head and said, "Okay, boss, I'll take care of it. I smiled at her, and she left the office. My morning was pretty free except for my 10:00 a.m. meeting with Nancy Leggett. She was one of the principals at Leggett and Hine, a PR firm that worked for Apex for about 6 years, and she became a good friend of mine. Nancy was an attractive, business-minded woman about my age. She was very witty and had a great sense of humor. In fact, she was one of the few women I could have dated if I hadn't been married to Gina. We talked in my office for almost an hour, in quiet voices, while I turned on the radio at full volume so that no one would eavesdrop. All they could hear was a Beethoven symphony and a few Strauss waltzes. At my request, Meredith ordered me sandwiches and a soda, which I ate at my desk while reading the newspaper. The real fun was supposed to start this afternoon, around 1 o'clock. Meredith called and said Jeff Denham was calling and wanted to see me right away. I smiled to myself and said, "Tell him I can't see or talk to him right now, Meredith. He can meet me at 16:00 hours, as I asked you." Did this mean Denham had planted a bug in my office? If so, an hour of loud music during my meeting with Nancy Leggett would undoubtedly make him wary. But something else could have alerted him. Perhaps he had tapped Meredith's phone or her office and heard her making arrangements for today, which I asked her to take care of. In any case, I knew that he was going crazy, and this thought gave me great pleasure. "Wait, idiot, it's going to get much worse." A few minutes before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I entered the conference room and found that it was equipped exactly as I had requested. The large conference table was empty except for the company laptop at one end, which was open and running. There was a video camera on a tripod at the far end of the room, and one of our technicians stood behind it, ready to film. "Hello," I said. "This is Arthur, isn't it?" He smiled widely at being remembered. "Yes, Mr. McMillan, Arthur Wentner. Everything is ready to go. Do you want me to stay and run it, or will I just show you how it works? Just show me, please, Arthur. I want him to work all day just filming the meetings I'm going to have here." He positioned the camera so that it covered the part of the room where me and my guests would be sitting, and we did a quick 30-second test. Everything worked fine. "The film cartridge is rated for 6 hours, so you're all set, Mr. McMillan." I thanked Arthur, and he left. I fiddled with the laptop for a minute, then switched it to screensaver mode and sat back in my chair. No more than 2 minutes later, Josh Daniels knocked on the door and walked in hesitantly. Finally, it all started. "Josh, come in and sit down, please," I said with a friendly smile. "You don't mind if we record the meeting, do you?" He looked worried and embarrassed. "Alex, what's the matter?" "We'll get to that in a minute." "Did you understand what I asked Meredith to tell you? This meeting is completely confidential. You agree not to talk about any aspect of it with anyone at Apex, now or in the future." He shrugged, still looking awkward. "Yes, of course, Alex, you're the boss. Is filming okay?" "I think yes. But why are all these—" I interrupted him. "Wait a second, Josh. Everything will become clear in a few minutes." I leaned back in my chair, looking at him with an indifferent expression, watching his confusion. Then finally, I spoke. "Josh, I know everything about you and my wife." He began to visibly tremble, trying in vain to appear calm. He could not keep his eyes on mine since they were constantly looking at him. They kept escaping my face. "Alex, I don't know what you're talking about." "No need to pretend, Josh. I have the photos right here." I told this lie with complete confidence, patting the thick manila folder lying next to me on the table. "But now, I'd like to hear all about it from you, please. You're in some pretty deep shit, and if you're not completely honest with me, it's going to get even deeper." I've been in some pretty tough negotiations in my business career, but I've never seen anyone look more miserable than Josh did in that moment. And I enjoyed every moment of his suffering, waiting for him to try to get out of whatever he was caught doing. A minute later, he said, "Alex, can we turn off the camera?" "No, we cannot." "Just keep going, Josh. I'm waiting. When did it start and how? And how can you justify having sex with your boss's wife for months behind his back?" He didn't take his eyes off the table. "Oh my God, Alex, this started about 4 years ago and lasted about 3 months. I think you know all this. Gina seduced me. That's what it was. Pure and simple. Linda and I have known you and her for years, and she has always been a bit of a flirt. God, who wouldn't be, with such and such a body? He stopped suddenly, wincing slightly at the thought of how that sounded. I just waited, and finally he continued. Anyway, she flirted with me a lot one time at a Christmas party we had in that old ballroom. It was quite obvious that she was attracted to me, but I could not believe that she was serious. Then, 2 weeks later, she called me one day while you were in Chicago and asked me to come to her house. When I arrived, she was wearing nothing but a long nightgown, completely transparent. I couldn't believe it. I tried to leave, I swear to God, but she pulled me inside, closed the door, and just stood in front of her, looking at me with a smile on her face. Then she said something crazy like, "I've wanted you for a long time, Josh, and now you'll be mine." I'm sorry, Alex, I really am. Right now, I feel like the world's worst asshole, but I was 38 years old, and never in my life had I even kissed such an amazing woman as Gina. I knew it was wrong, but I let it happen. A team of guys with flamethrowers couldn't get me out of there. She took my hand and led me into the bedroom, and we had sex. After that, I was practically her puppet. All she had to do was call, and I was there. Josh sat with his head in his hands, looking at the floor, completely depressed. How long did this last, and how did it end? Suddenly one day she said she'd had enough and she wasn't even being particularly nice about it. I'm pretty sure it was because I didn't want to do what she wanted. And what was that? I asked. He looked up at me for the first time since he began his confession. Now he could look me in the face. She wanted me to create several fake accounts to siphon money out of Apex. It was about money, Alex, nothing more. She said you have all these millions and she wanted most of it for herself. She asked me a lot of questions. In bed, after. About how our accounting systems work. Is it possible to somehow create fake accounts? How dangerous is this? And so on. At first I thought it was just a joke, but she brought it up again and again. In the end, I just said I wouldn't do it. He straightened up in his chair. I won't lie to you, Alex. I won't lie to you again. I refused, not out of morality, not out of loyalty to you or Apex. By that time, I was ready to do anything to be with Gina. But I didn't see a way to do what she wanted without significant risk of getting caught, and I didn't want to go to jail, not even for her sake. So when Gina realized that I really wouldn't do it, she just left me. And that was good, because Linda was sure I was having an affair. But it was all over before she could get the evidence. I denied it over and over, just lied and lied and lied, swearing it was nothing more than a bunch of extra projects at work. I don't think she really believed me, but she kind of let it die down. And I did everything I could to make amends to her, and thank God we are still together. We sat in silence for several minutes. Much of what Josh said was new to me. Barry's people were able to find evidence of the affair. Multiple phone conversations between Josh and Gina, as well as several paired email messages from her to him, and they pinpointed the dates. But Josh's story about Gina being the ringleader was new information, as were her hopes of stealing money from the company. I woke up. Okay, Josh, we're done for today. Go home for the weekend, don't go back to your office, and don't say a word about this conversation to anyone, inside or outside the company. Is everything clear to you? I spoke in a neutral, cool tone. Yes, Alex. He sounded submissive and scared. We'll talk on Monday, Josh. Until then, just go home to Linda and the kids. My conversation with Eddie Kreitler at 13:30 went about the same. Eddie rose through the ranks at Apex. He led international sales and marketing, then became the #2 director of operations. Of course, under my supervision. Gina targeted him several months after breaking up with Josh, according to phone and email records, and it continued for more than 6 months. He was single, so the two of them didn't have to be so careful. And, Eddie said, Gina had broached the prospect of stealing from the company little by little, probably not wanting to scare him. He said it started out as a joke between them and only very gradually grew into something serious that she wanted him to do. He said he went so far as to draw up several possible ways to do this, but never found one that wouldn't expose him to too much risk. To be honest, Alex, it was because the company is well managed. Oversight of our finances is tight, and I didn't understand how I could pull this off. And when I finally admitted it to Gina, she ended things with me. My conversation with Bernard Eisenhart, Apex's treasurer, took a very different turn. When I said, "Bernie, I know everything about you and my wife," he looked at me with blank eyes, an astonished expression on his face, but not the least bit upset. "What do you mean, Alex?" "Bernie, I have photographs here." I patted the manila folder. "There's not much point in denying it." "Photos?" He sounded a little angry. "I don't know what you have there, Alex, but if these are photos of what I think they are, then it's Gina you need to talk to, not me." I turned my back and walked out of there. I believed him too. His annoyance was so obvious, and Barry told me that they found nothing between him and Gina other than one phone call from her to him. "Okay, Bernie, I believe you. Could you tell me about this, please?" He was still furious. "She invited me to her place, Alex, told me some nonsense about a surprise party, wanted to hear my ideas about what you like. Not that it makes much sense to me. And when I arrived, well, you saw the photographs, dressed in a sheer nightie that didn't reach her hips. She pulled me inside, kissed me, and tried to put her tongue in my mouth. I'm sure it's in the photos." "What happened next?" "I told her I couldn't do anything with her. She's married to my boss, unlocked the door, and went out to my car. I just sat there, waited for my boner to go down, and then drove away. I didn't think there was any point in telling you, Alex. Nothing happened, and frankly, I was afraid that you would blame me and not Gina, so I just left everything as is, and now you accuse me of—" His voice rose in anger, and I interrupted him. "Calm down, Bernie, calm down. Let me explain. I just found out that Gina cheated on me with at least 2 other employees at the company, and I'm just trying to figure it out. I believe you. I believe that nothing happened between you." His anger disappeared, replaced by surprise. "With 2 other people?" "God!" He sat back down. "I do remember hearing a rumor about her and Josh a few years ago. Of course, I didn't believe it. I decided that people were simply obliged to say that, given how attractive she was. But after she made that crazy attack on me, I started thinking. However, it was none of my business. We talked for a couple more minutes. I reassured him of my confidence in him, reassured him about accusing him, and reminded him that our conversation was to be completely confidential. Then he left. As I sat contemplating what I had learned, Meredith walked into the conference room. "Alex, Jeff Denham is outside, and he's practically jumping out of his skin. I know you asked me to make an appointment for him at 4 p.m., but he's about to shit his pants. He says that he must see you this minute, that this is life and death, and so on. If it weren't for the guards you asked to be placed at the entrance to the room, he would have already burst in here. What do you want me to do with him?" I smiled at her. "Just give me 5 minutes and then you can let him in." I wanted those 5 minutes to just enjoy what was about to happen. It's not every day that you find out that your best friend wants you dead. And certainly not every day you have a chance to get even. When Jeff Denham walked into the conference room, he was practically shaking. He looked like someone on an espresso drip, although he tried to hide it. "Hey, Alex, what's going on?" It was said with carefully considered ease, but his voice was several tones higher than usual. "Hey, Dowdle, thanks for stopping by. Do you want coffee or anything else?" He shook his head. "What kind of video camera is this?" I smiled and said, "I just thought I needed a record of today's meetings. You don't mind, do you?" He looked very worried, but all he said was, "Not at all. Of course not. But what's the big secret anyway?" Meredith didn't say anything to me, and when I passed Bernie Eisenhart exiting the elevator, he simply nodded at me cheerfully and moved on. I turned the laptop around so it was facing him and said, "Look." When he tapped the built-in mouse, the screensaver disappeared, revealing a still frame from a video taken in my bedroom earlier that week. It showed him and Gina having sex. After a split second, Denham looked up at me, a look of complete shock on his face. I waited until he said, "Alex, And then I hit him. Several minutes passed before he opened his eyes and groaned, feeling his face with his hand. When his head cleared a little, he looked around for me, then quickly moved away from me and sat down against the wall, looking guilty and wary at the same time. "Do you want more, slimy freak? I can still hit you with my other hand." I spoke casually, almost frivolously. "Lord, no, Alex." I saw him look towards the door, as if wondering if he could escape, or if I would catch him before he got there. "Forget it, Dowdle. Those two guards are still outside. You're not leaving yet." We sat for a while longer, and I watched him sullenly consider his situation. Undoubtedly, he hoped that I did not know everything, but he was bitterly disappointed. "Okay, Dowdle, get up and sit back at the table. Don't worry, I'm not going to hit you anymore. What lies ahead will be much more painful than this." With caution, he stood up and sat on a chair 3 meters away from me, without taking his eyes off my face. "I'm not going to waste any more time on you, you piece of shit. My best friend since elementary school. You're a disgrace." He didn't bother to answer, so I continued. "You not only had sex with my wife, tried to steal my money, but you also tried to kill me." Here he jerked his head, looking at me in shock and alarm. "And I'm going to make sure that in prison you have new friends." "Gina confessed everything to me," I continued, now lying through my teeth. "And I know that the theft and the murder plan were your idea." "For God's sake, Alex, this is not true." He sounded absolutely desperate. "She's lying. I admit that I had an affair with Gina. There's no point in denying it now, but stealing the money and then killing you was all her idea. I tried again and again to talk her out of it. And when that didn't work, you said, 'What the hell?' and caused my car to break down, right?" He hung his head without looking at me. After a few minutes, he told me everything. The affair began in much the same way as with Josh and Eddie. Gina was pushing hard, and Denham couldn't keep himself in his pants. He swears he fought her off 2 or 3 times before he gave in, but it doesn't really matter, does it? After a couple of months of their joint infidelity, she started talking about stealing my money. Unlike his previous accomplices, Denham was willing to do this. He came up with a subsidiary company and found a way to have legitimate payments recorded in accounts receivable and then forwarded to the made-up company. Because he was the head of security, which included the finance division, he managed to prevent anyone else from looking closely enough to discover what he was up to. Over the course of 7 months or so, he managed to embezzle about $1.8 million. All of this was pretty much what Barry's people had already figured out. But that wasn't enough for Gina, Alex. Now Denham spoke freely, not paying attention to the camera. He was eager to speak out. He wasn't such a complete asshole that he didn't feel guilty about what he did to me. "She said you have so much money, $1 million or 2 is simply not enough for her. It's unfair." So I closed the account and covered my tracks as best I could. A month later, she started talking about killing you. Then we could be together, Dowdle, and stuff like that. You could run the company or let the other guys run it while you and I go spend this nice money. She didn't back down from it. Every time we were together, she had a new idea about what we would do later, when you die and she inherits your money. And you believed her? He sighed heavily. I was a fool, Alex. The sex was incredible, the most exciting thing that has ever happened to me. And I convinced myself that she loved me. I, of course, was in love with her, or so it seemed to me. I held out for a long time, and then she began to hint that if I didn't do this for her, then perhaps we were not meant to be together. After several weeks of such conversations, it began to seem to me that this was my only choice. Alex, Gina is a cold-blooded monster. Once she got the idea into her head, she became like a terrier with a bone. She just didn't want to let it go. So finally, I made some calls and found a guy who knew how to do these things. He said it would not be difficult to ruin a brake line, and if everything was done correctly, no one would suspect anything. He looked at me with an exhausted expression on his face. I know that you will never forgive me. How can you? But I still can't believe I did it. It was as if I was a different person, as if Gina was programming me and I was following her instructions. as if I were a little puppet. "Were you going to try again?" I already knew the answer after watching the video Asimov sent me. In a breathless voice, he said, "She wanted to. I insisted that we should wait a few weeks to make sure no one suspected the car. I tried my best to just put it aside. But eventually she would make me try again. She wasn't going to give up." He covered his face with his hands. Denham was broken. He was finished. He didn't even try to deny the truth. I asked him about the stolen money, and without hesitation, he told me the numbers of the 2 offshore accounts where he hid it. Everything except about $60,000 that Gina has already spent. It was already a little after 16:30. I conveyed Denham guards who were supposed to hold him until the police arrived. I then returned to the conference room and waited for Gina, who was scheduled to arrive at 5 p.m. With each new revelation, the incredible and painful truth seemed to sink deeper. My wife not only cheated behind my back and stole my money, she tried to kill me. How can this occur to a normal person? What did it mean that I lived with this woman, mostly very happily, for over 8 years without having the slightest idea of who or what she really was? Gina entered the conference room as usual, about 20 minutes late, looking glamorous and slightly annoyed. "Baby, what does this all mean? Meredith practically ordered me to meet you here, and she didn't tell me anything about what you want. Is something happening to the company? And why the hell did you leave me without a car this morning?" I watched her carefully and realized that the irritation was feigned. Behind it was Gina's worry. In all likelihood, he and Denham were harassing the phone lines today, trying to figure out what was going on. "Honey, just sit down, please, okay? It won't be easy for me." I sat quietly, as if struggling with my emotions, and watched as she tried to remain calm. I was determined to enjoy every last damn minute of it. After a long pause, during which Gina's knee began to wobble nervously, I spoke. "Gina, I know that you cheated on me. How could you do this to me? I thought you loved me." She tried to sit still, but her eyes widened and she tensed a little. I watched as she took on a sad and compassionate expression. It was impressively fast. She must have expected it. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. It's just, I guess, you were away from home so much and I—" She broke off and began to cry, earnestly. Perhaps I would have softened if I had not known the whole truth. Still crying, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Alex, is there any way you can forgive me? I do not want to lose you. I don't know, Gina. I just do not know." Then, after another pause, "I need you to tell me about this. When and how it started, and when it ended, and why. First of all, why? Why did you do this? Oh, baby, please don't make me talk about it. We can get through this. You'll see. I can make amends to you. I will be the best, most perfect wife you could ever—" "No, Gina," I said, making my voice crack. "If we ever get through this, you have to be honest with me. Here and now. When did it start? How long did it last?" I held her by her short hair and I enjoyed it. She didn't know which of her lovers I knew about. I deliberately spoke about her affair in the past tense so that she would think that it might not be Denham, but someone else. Now she had to guess. And if she guessed wrong, she would admit to cheating, which I supposedly didn't even know about. Reluctantly, she began to speak. "Like I said, Alex, you weren't home a lot, and I felt lonely, abandoned. I know it's unfair, you worked so hard and were successful, building a company for both of us, but I let it get the better of me, I guess. And then I had a couple of drinks, and when he made the pass, I just gave up." I laughed to myself. "Nice try, Gina, but you're not off the hook yet." "When was this, Gina? I really need to know." She suddenly rose from her seat, walked around the table, and tried to rush into my arms, with tears on her face, with tears in her eyes. "Alex, I'm so sorry." But I held her at arm's length, continuing to look into her eyes, and asked, "When was it?" I saw how, in a split second, a mental calculation appeared, and then disappeared from her eyes. She sighed, sat down on the chair next to me and said, "A little over 4 years ago. She bet on Josh Daniels." I chuckled to myself. Nice try, Gina. Too bad you don't know that there is no such thing as a right choice. And she looked at me, her irritation showing a little behind her mask of sadness, but she realized that she really had no choice. And this went on for several months. I don't know why, Alex, I'm just a little crazy. I knew it was wrong, and in the end I just told Josh I couldn't see him anymore. It was destroying me. I cried all the time and... Josh? I interrupted her with a shout. You also cheated on me with Josh? If you could have seen the expression on her face at that moment, in desperation, her eyes wide with fear, she said, "Baby, I don't understand what..." Eddie Kreitler wasn't the only one? I shouted at her. You slept with 2 of my employees? What the hell were you thinking? She tried to rush in to slow me down, but I was in shock. For God's sake, Gina, how can we fix this? How can I ever trust you again? God, everyone in Arch is probably laughing at me behind my back. No, baby, I swear it was just too... How am I supposed to believe this? I demanded. As far as I know, you've been with everyone I've ever dealt with. You did it with Dan Morin before he left. What about our friend Archie, or Debbie's husband Peter, or Dowdle? How can I be sure that you weren't with all of them? Gina saw her opportunity and jumped up. Her face took on a solemn expression, and she reached out and took both my hands in hers. In a quiet, serious voice, she said, Alex, God is my witness. It was only those 2. And that was many years ago. I regretted it so much. Since then, I have been completely faithful to you and will be faithful until the end of my days. Silence reigned in the room. I looked at her, tiredly, sadly, hiding the angry joy that I felt about her upcoming death. Okay, Gina, I said slowly. Okay, you cheated on me with 2 of my employees, but then you stopped. You pulled yourself together and decided to become my faithful wife again. This is true? Yes, baby, she said, hoping to appear in her eyes. Well, there is. It's just... I guess I need to ask you one more thing, I said, pulling the laptop towards her. Can you tell me what's wrong? I touched 2 keys. This time, as the title screen faded, the video began to move. We saw her with Jeff. I have to give Gina due. She didn't jump away from the laptop as if it were a snake, didn't try to run out of the room, didn't even scream. Just a quick "oh," suppressed almost immediately after the start. Then, after a few seconds, she closed the laptop and turned to face me. Her face was almost unrecognizable from just a few minutes earlier. Now it was a hard, angry mask. The eyes sparkled, and the mouth turned into a cruel grin. Okay, Alex, you caught me. Well done. What do you want me to say? Yes, I cheated with Duoderm, and he did it much better than you ever could. Is that so, Gina? Does this explain why you tried to kill me? This question shocked her. She froze, staring at me for a minute, and the best she could say was, What? I have no idea what you're talking about. Is it true? I said softly. I opened the computer, pressed a few buttons, and turned it so she could see. The scene was in our kitchen. Gina and Denham were sitting together at the table, both wearing bathrobes. Gina spoke. I don't care, Dowdle, so we were unlucky and he didn't crash the car. You can try again. Gina, you don't understand how risky this is. If someone starts to find out what happened, they... Nonsense. The car burned down, right? Completely destroyed, along with a bunch of others. Who would suspect anything? We just need some other way to kill him. I pressed the button, and the computer went silent. I smiled at Gina. I wish I had this video for you, huh, baby? It will be very difficult to stand up in court and deny that you had anything to do with this. I looked into Gina's cold eyes as the wheels turned behind them. She was like a rat caught in a disgusting trap and looking for a way out in every corner. She no longer made any attempt to appear sorry or even affectionate. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and contemptuous. You will never go to the police with this, Alex. It will make you a laughingstock, and Apex will become a laughingstock, the head of a multi-billion-dollar company, and his wife sleeps with his employees. You would become the world's fool." She sat with a contented and contemptuous look. I picked up the phone and asked Meredith to call Nancy Leggett. When she came in, she sat down across from Gina and me at the table, looking at my wife as if she were a bag of dirty laundry. "Nancy, my beloved wife Gina thinks it would be bad for me and for the business if I arrested her for grand theft and attempted murder. Why don't you tell her what you told me this morning?" Smiling widely, Nancy said, "Of course, Alex. This story, Gina and Denham and their dirty little plot, will be the biggest story on cable news for some time. It has everything: money, adultery, attempted murder, an extremely attractive woman, a man betraying his best friend, you name it. This will be more than Paris Hilton, more than the saga of Anna Nicole Smith. Gina will be the star of the month for a while, and Apex will get more exposure than the company has ever had in its entire existence, more exposure than $500 million in advertising, all for free. Alex will appear on Larry King, The Today Show, and so on. He will be an honest, hard-working businessman who has become a victim of an unscrupulous woman of easy virtue and her puppet. By the time the trial is over and Gina and Denham are in jail, Apex will be in Business Week and the Wall Street Journal. Someone will give Alex the Entrepreneur of the Year award. The company would get maybe $100 million in new business, and Alex would get 10,000 letters from women dying to be the next Mrs. McMillan. Some of them will send photos. "This is just a godsend for Apex. Not much fun for your husband, Gene, at least not right now. But you're about to make a rich, successful man even richer and more successful. As his public relations representative, I could never have dreamed of coming up with something so good." Nancy winked at me, then stood up and left the room. Gina leaned back in her chair, her eyes slightly unfocused, and her mouth dropped into a deep frown. Perhaps for the first time in all the years that I had known her, she looked completely broken. I picked up the phone. "Meredith, you can send the police right now. The next 14 months may or may not have compensated for what came before. It's hard to say, but they provided their share of entertainment. Police charged Gina and Denham with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, grand theft, and 6 or 7 other things. Apex's attorneys also immediately filed a civil lawsuit seeking the return of the stolen money, the whereabouts of which we knew thanks to Denham's confession. And, of course, I immediately filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery. Fortunately, due to criminal and civil lawsuits, all of Denham's accounts and all of Gina's and mine accounts to which she had access were frozen. By the time the two of them were released on bail, they had no money to hire expensive lawyers to defend themselves and had to make do, for a while, with public defenders. Quite frustrating. I kicked out Ginu from home and easily got the judge to put a restraining order on her. The video of her and Denham discussing the second attempt to kill me was pretty convincing. She persuaded Susan, one of her tennis buddies, to put her up temporarily at Susan's guest house. Gina made no attempt to contact me, not that I expected or wanted her to. She must have realized that there was nothing she could say to change anything. On Monday, after Gina's day of reckoning, I called Josh and Eddie in and fired each of them. Neither of them were very surprised. Eddie only asked that if a potential future employer contacted me for a recommendation, I would be willing to say that his work at Apex was good. I agreed without any problem. Josh tried to make a deal with me. If I helped him find a decent job, he would be willing to testify against Gina at trial. I laughed and kicked him out of my office. I reminded him that I already had his confession of the affair and her attempt to get him to steal from the company on tape. If he had not agreed to testify, prosecutors would have simply issued him a subpoena. I appointed Bernie Eisenhart as Josh's CFO with full confidence that he would do a top job. I asked him to take over the interviewing job for his own replacement as treasurer and Eddie's position. Gina and Denham's trial started about 7 months later, and it was fun. It lasted almost 3 weeks. I went to court a few times, but didn't feel the need to be there every day. Unsurprisingly, they could not deny what they had done, and each lawyer's defense was focused on making the other the main villain. Gina's main advantages were her beauty and ability to behave, not lie, on the witness stand. The men on the jury ate it up. The problem, of course, is that the video footage clearly showed her pushing a reluctant Dowdle to a new attempt on my life. And even Gina could not overcome it. They were both found guilty of about 8 counts, including all the major ones. By the end of the trial, all this publicity allowed Gina to sign several contracts for interviews in magazines and on television, which helped pay for the services of an expensive lawyer. The new lawyers filed appeals and so far managed to delay the sentencing, but Gina and Dowdle faced 10 to 15 years. All the money they stole was returned to Apex, minus $72,000. With Denham's security firm going out of business, I needed someone to take on the role for Apex. When I flew to Los Angeles to pay Barry Asimov and thank him for everything he had done, he suggested that I hire David Carlis. David wanted to move to the Bay Area, and you saw how well it worked. I think you will not regret it if you offer him a contract, and with you as the main client, he will be able to build a business there. So I suggested Carlis work, and everything seems to be going very well so far. While I was in Asimov's office, he surprised me with another video that I didn't know about. There was no time to talk to me about this before, and it had nothing to do with the threat from Gina and Denham. Come into the screening room for a minute, Alex. I think you'll enjoy it. To my surprise and delight, there in bed with Gina was Charlie Pemberton, my lawyer. He was almost 60. After they finished, which didn't last very long, they chatted in bed. Apparently, Gina seduced him a couple of months ago, and he started working on finding a way around our prenuptial agreement. It is not surprising that since Charlie was an excellent lawyer and drafted it himself, he did not have much success. But that didn't stop him from using Gina's services whenever she gave him the opportunity. I publicly and loudly accused him of unethical behavior as loudly as I could, and the California Board of Legal Ethics had no choice but to revoke his license. I also sued him and took about $240,000 of his savings that I donated to charity. All this gave me great pleasure. As far as Apex and I are concerned, everything went as Nancy Leggett predicted. There was a storm of publicity, primarily on cable news stations and in the tabloid press. I've been on CNN, on the cover of Fortune magazine, on the front page of the National Enquirer, and just about everywhere in between. Nancy had to hire 3 new employees to handle the workload, and she and I met almost every day to plan strategy and decide which interviews and other offers to accept. In the first 6 months after the story broke, Apex's business grew nearly 20%. Nancy was right about the letters from women, too. Today, there are already more than 8,000 of them, and they continue to come. After reading the first couple hundred, several of them with provocative or even downright lewd photographs, I handed over the job of answering them to one of her interns. As far as I know, this guy regularly engaged in love. Local divorcees and single women also got in touch, but to my surprise, I discovered that I was not that interested. I was very happy sexually, right up until everything fell apart, and I didn't feel the need to sow wild oats. I went on dates with 4 women who attracted me, but I quickly became convinced that a promiscuous lifestyle did not appeal to me. After several weeks of working closely with Nancy, I knew she was the one I wanted to date. We've been dating for almost a year. Neither of us is in a hurry to get married, but it may happen after a while. Last Sunday was my birthday and Nancy gave me something special. We spent Saturday evening at her house, watched an old Humphrey Bogart movie, and then made love. With Nancy, it's not just about the sensations. It's about the feeling of closeness. And that's great. On Sunday morning, she let me sleep while she prepared breakfast for us and brought it into the bedroom. I opened my eyes and saw her standing there in her robe, holding breakfast on a large tray. We ate together, and then she said, "Ready for your gift?" Actually, I wear it under my robe. I raised my eyebrows questioningly, but she just grinned. Ready? She asked. Then she took off her robe and stood in front of me. She was wearing only a white t-shirt that hugged her just below her hips, showing off her long legs. On the t-shirt was a scanned image of Gina grinning, no doubt taken from a photo of her that Nancy had found in my home. Under the photo, in large block letters, was written, "I survived the monster." I laughed and laughed. Then I said, "Come here, you." I pulled Nancy onto my bed. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. 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 Listening to the next one.